I think that's very insightful, Nora, and I think that's very much the debate that you hear in the boardroom about, do you add somebody with that expertise or not? But it is about asking the right questions and tied to some of the points that we were making of becoming educated enough as a board member while you're not an expert in that area to ask those right questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Harry?
Just wanted to lend my support to Ms. Vargas's comments. I think they're spot on. The curiosity, the open-mindedness, the teachability, those skill sets and characteristics, I think, are, at the end of the day, more valuable than solely having that expertise. Because if you're teachable, if you're open-minded, if you're curious, you can learn the stuff. But if you know the stuff and you don't have those other skill sets, it could be dangerous because you know it all.
No, curiosity is important, asking the right questions, challenging management when appropriate, making certain you end up comfortable at the end of the day with the discussion, what the decision was, are all key parts of being a board member.
Thank you.
And you actually took some of my notes here because I said curiosity and curiosity and the ability to ask questions. It's very nice for us to sit here and see that you are asking questions, you're engaged, and you want to know more about how you can improve your role.
Okay, thank you. Okay, why don't you proceed?
Okay. So we were talking about, ownership of where it sits within the board, the committee, the skill sets. The other piece to this step is then making certain at the management side that there is a clear owner. And I know you have that for some of the different areas that you focus on, but knowing who that clear owner is, making certain it's part of that person's job description, and then deciding how often the board or that committee is going to meet with that individual is part of this step. So just as another kind of data point, we asked directors in our annual corporate director survey how often they meet with the CIO. In your case, it would be the Chief Technology Officer of that same similar title. And those statistics would say that the board was meeting with the CIO. 25% of board members said they met with the CIO at every formal board meeting. 35% of them said they met with the CIO twice a year, and about 20% said they met with the CIO once a year. And that range is based on how important technology is, how important cyber is, where they are in the maturity process. But that does give you some information on how often boards are meeting. And again, that's another one kind of goes with the whole concept of technology where the trend line has increased. If you looked at the data, 3 years before, it would be less often that the CIO was meeting with the board at every formal meeting. So that's part of the framework of step 2 of really getting the board to focus on how they will approach each of these technology areas. And some boards actually have a risk matrix that they use when they look at risk, where they note who on the board's overseeing it, who on the management side is responsible for it, how often they're meeting. A similar document can be used when we focus on technology because there's a lot of different areas that boards may need to be focused on, and it can help, again, make certain that things don't fall through the cracks. So getting to the third step of the framework process, this is really prioritization. And this is the one where, as a board, you can't boil the ocean. You can't be focused on every area of technology. So it really is finding out and working with management to find out where the board should focus its attention. Certainly cybersecurity here at CalSTRS, you have a major IT system implementation. Those are areas that likely, come to the board. But there's a lot of other areas that CalSTRS is probably involved with, and whether the board should be engaged in those or not. Things like social media. We've seen where some boards have been engaged. I'm not saying that that is something that's required here at CalSTRS, but because social media is being used to engage customers more frequently, whether it's through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram, they are using that as a real strategy of the organization. And so you can see where boards are asking things like, well, how many followers do we have? How engaged are people at our company against us on social media? And importantly, is there anybody monitoring for any negative, adverse publicity about the company?
Yes. Every day.
I was wondering what the laughing was.
We were very vigilant on that topic.
Okay. And so, whether that is something because of the level of engagement, the board should at least become familiar with it. It ties to this holistic approach to the framework and the board getting the broader information on technology. Because as you can imagine, as you're putting these investments in things like social media or mobile computing, right? Everybody is using their phones as a means to access information, whether it's to access accounts from a financial institution or as an employee to gain access to my emails or gain access to my information. How are you ensuring that that information is secure? Is there a way to, are their passwords enabled? Are they monitored? If somebody loses their phone, is there a way for the company to remotely wipe data off of that phone so that the company is protected? How many people are using the apps? Those are all questions that if that's a significant strategy, the board could be asking about. But again, it's figuring out which areas of the technology, whether it's artificial intelligence when you move into some of these other areas or cloud computing. And there's a lot there for boards. And this really is the step where you want to ask questions from management, get the background on whether the company is moving in that direction, and then whether the board needs to be engaged in helping prioritize those areas.
And this is a good example of areas where you don't need, kind of back to your question, you don't need to be an expert in these areas. But I've learned over time and seen over time that moving into a new area, if it's mobile computing, for instance, if there's questions that just can be asked in terms of how that may impact the privacy of some of those, those crown jewels that I referred to earlier. Is that going to put those more at risk? Some things like that, and what other controls are in place to ensure that mobile computing isn't going to all of a sudden take all of the controls and security around the main system and weaken that. So there's some of those things where I think, again, it's not a technical viewpoint, but there's some very general and good questions that could be asked to make sure that is done in a controlled way.
And just for reference, the Directors in IT book that you have a link to, in the back of it, it covers a number of these areas, from social media to cloud services to big data. And it provides not only risks, what are the opportunities, what are the risks, and what are questions boards can ask about them. So my point of bringing that up is there's a lot of resources out there to help boards. They're very quick and short, but if it's an area that may be important to CalSTRS, there's a lot of resources to help board members.
Sharon, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question about this IT oversight framework. And I'm thinking about, as we go through these different bars, like social media, even AI, big data, we get reports from our service center about like how many members are using Twitter or how many folks are accessing our mobile app. We get information about our pension, I'm spacing on what it's called, our big system implementation, yeah. We get reports on that at the regular board. We're getting a lot more information about cybersecurity. So it's kind of like we're getting this information in different committees in different ways. And I'm just wondering, do you think there's value, or is it helpful for boards to have a more holistic approach to getting information about our IT? Does that make sense? Kind of,
No.
Is it more helpful to say, okay, there's an IT oversight item, and you talk about the different parts of IT in the organization, and do you see what I'm saying?
Well-
Because right now it's sort of siloed off into different committees, which makes sense. I guess I think the question as a board member, are we capturing the right amount of oversight? Like to Nora's question, like, are we making sure we're providing the right level of oversight with IT at CalSTRS?
And thank you for that question, Sharon. Yeah, it's very much about having a holistic approach. And I think that's what this framework aims to do. So you'll see as we continue through the process, you can sort of figuring out where as a board you should focus your attention, but you'll see how ultimately it should come together, and so that the board does get the full picture of how technology is used. Because with each of these new technologies, there's also risks. So how do all these technology risks combine together, create risk to the organization? So yes, very much it's all about bringing that all together in this holistic approach. You'll see in the end, we're talking about, do you get kind of a director's dashboard on technology where you wouldn't get 50 statistics, but what are the number of statistics, whether it's 15 statistics that really help the board understand where the company is about technology. So that as we work through the process, hopefully that comes through even clearer, but that is the goal of the framework.
So that's something, can I just ask Jack, is that something that we're discussing? I mean, this idea of a director's dashboard or an ability to
I
kind
think
of,
it's a great topic for us
Yeah.
to do. I was listening carefully
Interesting.
when you were kind of recounting all the different things we feed you, and oddly enough, nothing to do with this particular slide, but actually, we have planned a social media presentation for you for July on all what we're doing, because there's some positive changes in our activity I wanted you to know about, but it's making me think, not about committee structure, but about content organization, how we bring that to you. So I think we should pause on that a little bit, and this perfect opening. Yeah.
And I think we were going to get into a little bit of a discussion between strategy and risk related to this, but when I listened to your question, the way at least I processed it is, I could see, for instance, some of those different statistics you talked about, or maybe those metrics that you get. One of them is from a lens of strategy, meaning are you from a strategy standpoint, from a member standpoint, are you doing the most you can from a mobile computing standpoint and social media standpoint to help your members and their beneficiaries with the information? So that's the strategy side, and so you have your strategy hat on. But then, and I don't know if that's a separate group or whatever it is. It's from a risk standpoint of, okay, now we're using mobile computing. What does that introduce as a new risk to this organization in terms of secure information and privacy of information? So it almost seems to me like you got to have either your strategy hat on or risk hat on, and maybe they can be done at the same time, but that's another way to maybe sort through that information.
interesting.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Joy?
Actually, the point that you just made was what I was going to ask about, was whether it's, I understand the concept of having a holistic view or perhaps reporting to the board on all technology matters, but I do think that it sounds like it's appropriate for a board to think about the different lens through which they'll look at and use the information from a security and risk and compliance standpoint in terms of making sure that our data is secure, but then also from a kind of an outreach and education standpoint, which I think is the other bucket that Sharon mentioned where we get information. So looking at those two differently is appropriate to do.
Yeah, I would definitely think so, because this, again, I said it earlier that I think there was a time there that I know I'm overstating this, but with some of the items, mobile computing or social media, those kind of things were all almost a negative. They were all risk. They all thought they were all risk, and what are we doing about it? But there is a whole nother way of looking at it, which is those are opportunities to from a strategic standpoint to meet the needs of your members. So I agree. I think there's different lenses you can look through that can bring you into different places. They both have to work together, but they can be looked at with different lenses. I definitely agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. So one area, if I might, that I always feel like we don't give enough time to, not to say that it necessitates a lot of time every board meeting, is our pension solutions project, because I always feel like it's kind of buried, but it's actually a big deal. And I'd like to maybe see that elevated to the top of the board meeting agenda, so we just kind of, and there may not be anything to report, but just to elevate it, because I do think that's a huge undertaking that has all kinds of attendant issues that the board should be aware of. So if we could.
That'd be fine.
Maybe have
It's
a
certainly
public
elevated in our minds, so.
Yeah, okay, I'm sure it is.
It's not easy, it's not hard to elevate it to the
Okay,
agenda, trust
all
me.
Yeah, I just find that, I look to that, but then I think, my
Yeah.
goodness, maybe we should have that at the beginning of the board meeting discussions. Okay. Paul?
Well, that's a great comment, because I think it is a really important issue, and yet we do have it on every agenda, and yet it is probably very rare that any board member asks a question about it. And I think we used to ask a few more. I think we ask very few now. And you know, I think we have as a board to ask the question, well, why are we not asking questions? Is it because we're not paying attention? Is it because we don't know what questions to ask? I'll tell you, for me, that's it. I used to ask questions, and I don't really know what questions to ask anymore. And so, you know, I agree that focus and curiosity and the attempt to learn is something that we can all do. But I also know that you know, where we have consultants who are better at figuring out what those questions are than we are, and they ask those questions, and we have in the Audit and Risk Management Committee, we have a consultant who does that on investments. We have people who do that it helps us. So I completely agree with you, but elevating it without somehow the board figuring out how to be more engaged in asking questions about that isn't going to accomplish probably what you're hoping to accomplish.
And actually, the only reason I want it elevated is because it is a big undertaking. It's a costly undertaking, and I think all of us feel some degree of responsibility over it. And certainly, to the extent that there are issues of risk that are that need to be brought to our attention. But I do think out of this presentation today, I mean, I'm getting a better sense of the kinds of questions that we could focus on. And it may be that there aren't any questions, that, you know, the project is proceeding along and we're at stages of the project where things are working fairly smoothly. So, and I'm only asking that it be elevated because I oftentimes find it so buried in the agenda that maybe it's not conducive for us to ask questions because we're really in a race against time to get through the meeting, so.
Well, we would welcome questions on the project. I would never, and
No.
projects of this complexity are never smooth. But I think more to come in the presentation, and we'll make sure you get the actual full white paper that PwC wrote, because the appendix has
Yeah.
pages and pages and pages of questions for boards to get you thinking about what are the right areas of focus. I think Barbara and Terry will share some of that in the coming slides here.
Sharon, do you have a question?
Okay, great. I was just asking about the report, and because I'd love to look at those questions. So, I think my only comment is I know that, you know, Dana and I, as chair and vice chair, do get on a call to talk about pension solutions. So, and on those calls, we are asking deeper questions. But I think Paul's comment is apropos, which is, and I feel the same way when it's a huge amount of money, and there's a lot of moving parts, and there is risk involved to our system, and so perhaps it's maybe we need to take a different approach moving forward on how we approach that item. So elevating it, but also maybe asking for more maybe questions ahead of time, or asking for more help in thinking about what questions to be asking, because I would like to, I feel like we're in a little bit of a rut with that, you know?
Yeah.
It's sort of like
Yeah.
we started off and it's like we get it, and now we've kind of, so I'd like to change that pattern somehow in our analysis, because I do think it's important for us to provide oversight on that project, so.
Yeah, I think actually, in the PowerPoint you've got later in the day from Grant Thornton, they actually switched a bit. You know, I think you should look at that when they present that and have a list of questions that were actually pretty probing.
So Jack and I are channeling
Jack,
energies
stole your
here.
thunder.
I totally agree. Move it up on the agenda. I support a more structured approach, working with our consultants, guiding questions for us. And I knew I saw this in preparation for the meeting. It is in PowerPoint 13A by Graham Finley.
Right.
They do list 5 questions for us and for guiding questions. So that's something we continue to ask our consultants for. And when we ask for those things, they deliver them. And when they don't, they know the consequences of.
Yeah, I think
meeting on meetings.
it'd be great to focus on that page when you get to that this afternoon. Is that feel like it's the right area? They're certainly not softball questions. They're on that page, so it's worth some focus.
So, with respect to Barbara and Terry's presentation, I know there are a series of questions coming up on major IT system implementation. I want to be mindful of time of this committee, but maybe we'll have them focus on that, just to give us a flavor of the kinds of questions, and that might inform our discussion later this afternoon as well.
So, so your prior comments were perfectly timed. So let me try and tackle a little bit of the questions to ask around a major system implementation. And I will admit, I don't know much at all about your system implementation, but I can tell by things I've read and certainly by what I just heard that it's large and it's something that you're focused on. So, and I have been involved from a client standpoint in a number of very large implementations, some of which have gone very well, some of which have not. And so I have some experience there, not from a technical system implementation standpoint, but more from an audit standpoint to make sure that they go well and that data is accurate. So what I guess I would like to do here, especially given what you just said, is try to focus on a few of these questions, and I don't know how they will relate to some of the questions it sounds like Grant Thornton has for you, but these are some that I think are good ones to think about. And to me, sitting on a board level and knowing that not knowing all the details because of how technical it is and how difficult it is, but those questions that get into whether this project is on time, whether this project's on quality, whether this project is on budget, or I mean, even if they're just those kind of basic questions, and that's what I've seen corporate boards really focus on because they have the same issue. They're relying on management, who it's in some degree is relying on maybe some third parties that are helping. So what I'd like to focus on here is what are those things that you can focus on that are success factors, and get it at a level that you can navigate given your backgrounds. So let me take a few of the questions that are on your screen that I think jump out at me and ones that I've seen personally either kind of make or break an implementation. And I'm gonna start with number 3. Who's the management owner? And again, this is probably all known, but here at CalSTRS, but having that management owner, not third-party owner, management owner, who is really the person who's kind of making those calls, and when it gets to that point, whenever that point is of go, no go, when you go live, who is it that's going to really be advising management and ultimately advising the board that, okay, we can go with this go live and we're ready to go. So who is that person, and is there some level of relationship between the board and that person such that you have an idea of what some of those issues might be and what third parties are being used and so on. So I think really knowing that has been a key that I've seen, and to be honest, has not always been there for companies doing a large scale implementation. And now we're getting into some things that are a little bit more, I don't know if I call them technical. They're technical in the details, but they're not technical in the concept. And the next one's number 5, data conversion. Again, I don't know if there's metrics that you've received on data conversion, but when you're implementing information or converting information from one system that maybe has been around for a long time and has a structure of the way it holds data, and that's being converted to your new system, I've seen that issue alone delay go-live dates in a significant way because that information can be embedded in that old legacy data, and there's just no easy way to take it out. So that's a line of questioning in terms of data conversion that I think would be good to know whether that's an issue or not. Maybe it's not an issue here at all, but that is an area that's on the short list in terms of things that could go wrong. The next one is number 6 on change management. And change management, I guess, to me means is the organization ready to capture the benefits or react to the changes that this new system is going to bring? And mainly it's capturing the benefits, because if you don't have change management, you can say have people in the organization make the new system act like the old system, which means that you spend a lot of money not to get any of the benefits that hopefully you're going to get. So there's a lot of training, and I've seen metrics at the board level of what is the plan for training, who's in charge of training, what's the plan to train everyone, are there different almost tests that people take, and have those people pass those tests? So from a change management side, that can be very significant depending on the nature of the system and how much it's going to change the processes of an organization. So change management is certainly one it's on that list. Number 7, I'm not sure how internal audit plays here at CalSTRS. I will probably just say this, that I am more and more, and I've interfaced with internal audit for many, many years, but I'm more and more seeing that internal audit functions as a whole are stepping up and getting better, and that boards are using internal audit or someone that functions as internal audit better to act as an interface on things such as a system implementation. The reason I say that is many times you're talking to, it could even be the management person or the third-party consultants, and they're at a level of understanding that's way beyond a board member and way beyond on my understanding. But if you have someone like internal audit that's very involved, can speak to the board without the jargon or maybe the technical aspects, and maybe can just translate it a bit. I just have seen internal audit functions in a lot of different ways, system implementations being one, be able to be another data point for the board to know whether something really is on schedule, whether it's on time, whether it's on quality, whether it's on budget. So that's another one to focus on. The last one I would call, number 8, is maybe a bit of a catch-all. And it gets into the questions that could be asked, but there are metrics that I guess I'm confident that for CalSTRS, for this system implementation, even though I know next to nothing about it, that there's some metrics that can be drawn out of that. Whether you go back to data conversion, whether you go back to change management, whether you go back to the whole issue of it's on time, is it on quality, is it on budget, that can be used at a high level that will provide you enough detail to oversee the project. And because I said at the beginning of our talk that whole issue of where does a board belong in terms of its level of detail? Or can you ride too high? Can you be a level of management? So where's that part? Where's that position you should be at to be really overseeing it and really governing it? And I guess my view is to be able to govern, you need some level of detail. It doesn't have to be a lot, but some level of detail, and usually that comes in the form of some high-level metrics that be able to, for you to understand whether this is on time, whether it's on quality, whether it's on budget, and whether you are getting the straight scoop, if you will, in terms of how that project's going. So again, you've clearly have a big project ahead of you, but I think there are ways to provide some metrics, ask some good questions, and it sounds like you've been provided also from your consultant that will help you be able to understand whether you're comfortable with the status.
Dana, you have a question? Dana?
No, sir. I'm good.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right,
I must have been playing around with my gadget.
no problem. Joy?
And I would just say from the change management perspective, it's such a key part of a system implementation, but it's not only through the execution or the go live dates, but it's the support that's provided after the execution takes place. Successful companies have had sort of champions out there in the practice that can help answer questions as people are taking on new responsibilities or trying to work with a new system. So having that support post active date or live date is important.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that is one thing that I didn't yet say is I think companies, and I've heard companies admit this after the fact, that those that I said have allowed companies to have their employees work around the system to make it act like the old system. They have kind of fallen down in the area of keeping those metrics after go live, meaning a lot of people, you get to go live, nothing crashed, everything, you operated, you feel good, and you kind of forget about it. But I think where companies find they need to do more is after go live to continue some of those metrics, that make sense of, there must have been some benefits you expect out of this new system, and you don't know you're achieving those benefits unless you track those for some period after go live and not use go live as kind of the end date. So that is a very pervasive, I'll call it, issue in terms of companies and their oversight not just boards, but companies' oversight of a large system implementation. There's just too much of a exhale at the time of go live, and there still needs to be some work done.
Joy, you have a question?
Yes, so getting back to some of the questions and oversight around system implementation, we have a consultant that works with the board and, provides reports to us at our board meetings. I think one of the things that happens is during the interim periods between board meetings, the consultant may work with the management and staff to track progress on the project, and questions that the consultant may raise are addressed through those conversations with the staff, so that by the time we get to a board meeting, they're presenting, green, that everything is on track, but we don't have the benefit of knowing what issues may have come up and what issues the consultant has vetted and worked through on our behalf. So does it make sense to also, find a way for the consultant to not just report on status as of June 8th, 2017, which may be all green, but also on issues that came up along the way, so that we have more assurance that the consultant working on behalf of the board has addressed issues, is constantly addressing issues throughout the course of their own oversight. I don't know if that makes sense, but otherwise I feel like sometimes we get to the board meeting and things look good and there aren't a lot of questions to ask, but we might have a higher degree of confidence if we know that the issues that came up were vetted and worked through, and there's a kind of constant, oversight and improvement in the program.
No, I think it's a very good question, and it kind of gets to the key of having some ability to understand the risks that are out there, and I would maybe characterize it this way. I think it's very good for the board to be knowledgeable or be informed of some of the issues that arose during that period. And the reporting I've seen is what are some of the risks? I mean, just what are some of the risks in some of these areas? What are some of the risks in data conversion, or some of the risks in conversion strategy, those kind of things? What are some of those risks? And as part of the board, I don't think there's any, to me at least, I don't see an issue with those items being resolved, between meetings, meaning the board not being involved. That's part of management, it seems to me. But if it's a significant decision, maybe, and that's maybe what I'm trying to differentiate. The board doesn't want to know all of those things that happened between meetings, because I'm sure there was a lot. But were there significant decisions that were made that could impact the outcome of the project? And was it a key decision, or maybe something that affected the original plan? Because that's the other issue that can come up, is you've got an original plan, an original formula for success, but there's been decisions made along the way that have determined that some of that success is lower than it originally was, but it maybe wasn't apparent. So I think the best way to say that is, I think that's a good thought. I would think that they would just need to be significant items that give you a good sense of whether that's an indicator of a risk that could happen again, or it's a decision that could affect the outcome of the maybe functionality of that system.
Harry?
Thanks. I don't know the answer to the question. I don't even know if it's a good idea. And I don't necessarily think it needs to be answered right now, but it's something for maybe our council to think about, and for the leadership of the board to think about, in relationship to the question that Ms. Higa asked. Under what, given the unique nature of working in a public setting and being broadcast live on the internet, that creates additional challenges. But given the sensitivity of the IT project, the magnitude of its potential impact, it would be interesting for council to look into under what circumstances, if any, I can explore this outside, not now, under what circumstances, if any, could we be actually in closed session only with our consultants and somebody taking minutes, absent management, on those very, very unique times where something needs to be brought to our attention. Something for us to think about. Okay?
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Harry. Let me just do a time check. I'm noting the lateness of the hour. I'd like to really have the committee receive the rest of the presentation, maybe within the next 15 minutes, and then allow a little bit of time for questions at the end. Okay.
You said 10 minutes, right?
15?
10?
15 minutes?
15 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm thinking, and I'm wondering if we want to go past cybersecurity.
I think you could go do a brief overview, and I'll have members just hold their questions till the end.
Okay. So we put a slide in here on cybersecurity because, of course, this is a topic that's important to most boards, and I'm sure important to you here at CalSTRS. And I know it's an issue that you do focus on. I had the chance to speak with Brian before coming here, so I know it's something that you're engaged with. And I guess as I think about it, and, you know, as with Terry, we put a list of questions up on the screen. And maybe I'll just pick a few of them to highlight of areas that maybe boards are focusing on today. One of them is on the threat environment, and it's actually number 6 on here. I'm probably not going in order, but, you know, how does the board stay current on the threat environment that exists out there as well as for your industry? And as we know, it changes quite rapidly. You know, it was only a couple weeks ago that there was a global attack that affected 150 countries and 200,000 computers. So as a board, one of the good questions is to find out how management keeps its pulse on the threat environment. We do hear from within PwC, we do a global economic survey. And in that global economic survey, they actually say that almost 50% of cyber attacks are due to former or current employees. So that's always like a big risk within an organization, whether it's intentional or unintentional acts. But often it's the employees inside. So as a board focusing on how they're being educated on any new threats that are out there, you may recall the phishing scheme that happened, you know, probably about a year and a half ago, where it looked like authentic notices were being sent to the Treasury Department from the CEO, and that money was being asked to be transferred to foreign banks. And so what you saw companies do is make certain that their employees were educated within those departments to know that that was a big threat and to put additional controls in place. Phishing schemes still seem to be a major area of focus for threat actors. And so, as I said, you know, even board members have said the best money that can be spent on cyber is through education of employees and making it part of their day-to-day responsibilities. Another question is, you know, similar to one of the questions on the former slide is, you know, how effective is our cyber strategy? Is it really being effective at preventing people from coming into our system? And that, again, is where you can get some metrics to understand what the trend lines are as a board, whether there are, how many successful attacks there are. Is that trend line increasing? And one of the focus that we see with board members is the mean time of both identification and remediation of an attack. And as probably all of you know on board, you never can get the cyber risk to zero. So for companies, you're constantly under attack. And so it's not surprising that an attack happens. It's how significant it is and how quick you are to respond to it. So some metrics that help the board understand how successful the strategy is can be helpful. In addition to the question, you know, to the CTO on the priorities from a cyber perspective that Terry mentioned is, you know, if you had an extra $1 million, where would you spend it? Where do you find that we are lacking significant resources or support to really defend our strategy? And then probably just I'll mention one more. Well, I'll probably mention 2 more. One is about, do we have cyber insurance? And this is a question, I think in CalSTRS you do have cyber insurance. And we've seen where, companies are taking different approaches to cyber insurance. I think part of it is the fact that it's a pretty new industry, and so the policies are being formulated, as we're dealing with these cyber attacks. So it's one that as a board, you'd want to understand the rationale for whether you took a policy out or why you didn't, and importantly, what it covers, and importantly, what it doesn't cover. So what are you protected against? And just being careful of the provisions that might be within the policies. I'm familiar with one policy that said that if the attack was performed by a nation state, the company would not be covered. In that case, how do you identify who the threat actor is? And so you want to be careful about the policies. And again, it's a new industry. And then finally, as a board, thinking about where we've really seen the shift as boards have been engaged in cyber over the last few years is really having number 7, a cyber incident response plan. Because it's, as I said, it's not a matter of if for most organizations, it's a matter of when. So it's really important for the company to be prepared for that crisis. So as a board, you want to ask about whether the crisis response plan has been looked at recently, how often, and whether it's been tested. Looking for things, making certain that there's clear roles and responsibilities, as well as knowing who potential advisors would be. If a crisis happens, your advisors that you would use for a cyber incident are likely probably different than what you would use for a different type of crisis. So it's easier to kind of know ahead of time who those individuals might be, as well as what are the board escalation processes to make certain that the board gets informed if there is a crisis situation. And probably the biggest part of the whole cyber response plan is the communication, both externally and internally. So companies are testing those plans. Boards are not often engaged in the actual tabletop exercise. They may watch it or observe it and just find times when they can be engaged or when they should be informed about something happening. So I think that's a big focus and a big shift over the last year.
Oh, I just have a couple areas to touch on, and this will really be wrapping up for us. And the last two topics are really focused on IT and strategy, IT and risk oversight in general, and maybe just a few comments. Many of these we've, in different ways, talked about these, and some of your questions were right on point on some of these. And the first one on strategy, what we've seen, certainly as a leading practice is to embed IT initiatives into strategy oversight, and disruptive technologies and the movement of technologies is a mega trend that affects a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, and certainly would also impact CalSTRS. I've seen your strategic plan. It certainly does focus on technologies and the impact on the organization. We are seeing, just as a governance benchmark, we are certainly seeing boards get more involved in strategy discussions, more involved in the impact of technology on those strategies. And so we're seeing that embedding or baking them into strategy much more than we had in the past, given some of the impacts they've had on other organizations. So we see organizations look out 3 to 5 years is really kind of the time period that we see them look out from a strategy standpoint. Not many go beyond that because it's too many uncertainties. And again, the board's being more and more engaged. And moving more from a maybe once a year strategy discussion to something that's more frequent to occur from are we still on strategy? Is there some things that need to change? The other things that we're seeing, again, from a governance standpoint is, I'll call it functional leaders being involved with board discussions on strategy to understand, maybe it's depending on the organization, in a little bit more level of depth, some of the areas that impact strategy, looking at change management and some of the other more detailed areas of a given function at an organization, so below kind of the CEO level. And then we've seen, customer satisfaction surveys, things like that impact the strategy. What are you hearing from your members, and what are some things that could be be done differently. And so certainly those having an impact on strategy. So, and the other is just, what kind of culture from a organization standpoint exists to look at strategy and maybe think of things differently, especially as it relates to IT. Let me quickly shift then, to risk. And again, I think risk and strategy go hand in hand. We hear that from board members all the time, and for good reason. Though maybe the one point I'll just make here to be brief is the third-party impact on risk is one that we are seeing emerge more and more. Third parties impact companies in different ways, obviously. But I said it earlier that from a third-party standpoint, and let's stick to IT, one ways you're using third parties as part of your ongoing IT process, maybe outsourcing. We see companies outsource their hosting of their IT shop, different things, cloud computing, you name it, that are using third parties. But also, and maybe more problematic, is some of those third parties that have access to the system for different reasons and have different ways and have different vulnerabilities. And so we're seeing, from a risk standpoint, more and more companies narrow their risk profile to third parties and really almost inventorying those third parties, not just in IT, but broadly speaking. And how could those third parties create a risk for the company, be it loss contingent or a loss issue or reputational, those type of things. So the third party side of it has certainly grown, and it's partly a function of there's just more outsourcing of functions that exists today versus in the past. And there's, again, been some high exposure issues, cyber breaches and so on that have resulted from third parties. So again, embedding those into the process as part of strategy, part of risk, is certainly something that we see real benefits from and see a much more of a movement toward.
And just to close, and I think this ties a lot with the question earlier, as you walk through the process, prioritize and really embed your oversight in the strategic side and the risk side of what you do as a board, it concludes with monitoring and looking at your cybermetric reporting. And we touched on some of this already, but it's the fact that it shouldn't be static, that certainly technology is changing quickly. So as you go through this approach, you may need to reallocate where certain technology areas are being overseen, whether you need different skill sets or resources to help you or get educated in another area, and then also the prioritization of what technologies you focus on. So this is just that it's a continuous process. And then really tying to the fact to the director's dashboard and taking a holistic approach and getting the metrics that help you as a board oversee technology throughout CalSTRS. So this is really just the summation step to that process. And maybe we'll just pause there in the interest of time and just see if there's any final questions.
Great, thank you very much. Paul?
Thank you. This is really helpful, and I think it reminds me that a few years ago I went to some sessions about cybersecurity for directors, and maybe we could get notified of more opportunities like that. And just generally, I mean, I think, we have a great board education policy program, but most of it's focused on investment issues. And there's a lot of other sort of director-related issues that maybe we could be trying to see more opportunities, not just in, how does a director address and become educated about cybersecurity issues, but other things. And maybe that's something that board governance can work with staff on in sort of beefing up board education opportunities.
Yeah, it's a high priority for the NACD, which Barbara mentioned earlier. They definitely are developing a learning track around technology for directors, and I've been impressed by some of the quality of those events.
Because
that's what you went to,
right.
yeah.
Well, I went to one at Stanford
Yep.
it was a half-day session, and I went to one in San Francisco for I think Robin was there, and, I mean, with staff as well. But they were both, they were more corporate oriented, but they were still educational. They were still useful.
Great suggestion, thank you. Other questions, members? I want to thank Barbara and Terry. This has been just really a wonderfully robust presentation, giving us a lot of food for thought. And I'm just really pleased that you're leaving us with a number of questions that will spur further thinking in terms of our oversight role. So just very, very grateful for the robustness of the presentation. So, thank you.
Our pleasure, thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, I think, let's see. Heidi, let me look to you and Brian in terms of the review for information requests. Any?
Just maybe the one at the very end there, keeping an opportunity for reported.
Yes, no, and I definitely will.
And I
take-
heard Mr. Keeley asked me to take a look at some legal issues.
Exactly,
so
exactly.
follow up on that.
If you will proceed with that, and I'm happy to really have this committee take a leadership role with respect to further educational opportunities for various director-related issues. Okay, very good. Sharon?
To maybe moving forward, it sounds like Jack was open to a conversation about a bigger picture kind of IT oversight for us as a board
Yes.
and ways to kind of
Yeah.
de-silo the IT information perhaps. So
Absolutely.
seems
I
like
think that's
something
good.
we
That's a
should-
hardy item. We should think about that in the work plan. Absolutely.
Exactly. Very good, thank you. Okay, thank you. Let's see, why don't we move, are there members of the public wish to address the committee? Okay, seeing none, any other business from members? Brian, anything else? All right, very good, then this committee is adjourned, thank you.